Hello everyone, good morning. It is 2022 and we are back with another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. I'm Carly Riley. Thank y'all so much for being here with me for another year. We launched late last year and I think 2022, therefore, is going to be the best year of Overpriced JPEGs yet. I can't wait for everything that we have in store. On that note, I wanted to say a couple things about where I want to go with this show for this year. And I've really tried to think, I guess I'd call it thematically about what I want to explore on this show for, call it 2022. Maybe it'll be for Q1 of 2022 and we'll mix it up in a couple of months. But this phrase has continued to sort of bounce around my head. And it's NFTs beyond PFPs. And really what that means for me is I feel like there are these verticals within the NFT space that are really promising and really interesting. And I want to go deeper and wider on those verticals in the interviews we do and in the areas of study that I sort of undertake. So some of you may have heard me mention these before, but I really think we're looking at art and generative art and digital art and the way that the traditionally only physical art world is starting to get disrupted by the digital art world thanks to blockchain technology and NFTs. I think that's really interesting. So how do we understand the art market in the Web 2 world to maybe give us more context into what's happening or what we should be looking for in the Web 3 world? Gaming. Obviously, this is a huge, huge, huge one that personally I do not understand well enough. I do not understand the gaming industry and infrastructure and just world in general, the consumer tastes well enough to really understand it properly in Web3. So that's something I want to dive more into. Intellectual property. At the end of the day, every project, including PFPs, and by the way, PFPs overlap with all of these other things. They overlap with art, they overlap with gaming. So it's not to be dismissive of PFPs when I say NFTs beyond PFPs, but intellectual property. Every project at this point claims that what they're building is intellectual property. But what does that mean, right? Really? And how do you monetize intellectual property, traditionally speaking? How is that maybe changing in the world of NFTs? So intellectual property is something I'm going to focus a lot on for the next month. I'm talking to a couple of, honestly, I guess you could call them IP experts, and I will definitely air a couple of those conversations, or at least one of those conversations if I think it's interesting and worth everybody hearing. But I think starting to understand some of these industries will be really helpful in terms of then evaluating specific projects and evaluating what's happening in the space. Of course, I will continue to interview founders for big projects and founders of teams, and all of that is stuff I love. So we'll keep doing that. But I also want to go a little wide and a little deep on some of these general industry areas. So that's some of what we have in store for this year. I hope that's interesting to all of you. And of course, we'll continue to do these weekly recaps. I do have some special recap announcements, but I may wait and make it sort of next week in terms of a recurring guest we're going to start having as part of these recap episodes. And I'm super excited about that. But we'll wait. I think I'm not going to announce that right just yet. Okay, so speaking of recap episodes, this is this week's recap, I suppose you could say. But because I really haven't been on the mic solo like this in a while, since I think before Christmas, there's a lot to catch up on. So want to dive in. Want to give you some heads up of what's coming down the pike around Sandbox. Want to talk about what's been happening with the apes, because it feels like there's always something happening with apes. Of course, we're going to talk about some interesting projects. Want to highlight Flipmaps. If you haven't heard about them, they should definitely be on your radar, because I think they're a really interesting case study that touches a number of themes that are super relevant and interesting here in NFT blockchain world. Want to talk about Chainfaces Arena. If you haven't heard about that project, also want to put that on your radar. And I'm going to close with something a little philosophical and something sort of a thought experiment, if you will. And I'll be curious to see who agrees, what the thoughts are. Please tweet at me, and let's get a little bit of a philosophical conversation going.
Polygon is Ethereum's largest and most vibrant scaling solution to date. With millions of monthly users and all of the biggest DeFi apps, the Polygon ecosystem has turned into a blossoming metropolis of DeFi activity. Transactions on Polygon are quick and cheap, allowing users the freedom to achieve their DeFi goals, all while being economically anchored to Ethereum. But Polygon isn't just the proof-of-stake sidechain. The Polygon team is building a suite of scaling solutions, including Polygon Hermes, Maiden, Nightfall, and Zero, all with different design choices in order to be optimized for all possible crypto use cases. If you're a developer who wants to build on the Polygon ecosystem, go to the link in the show notes to check out their fantastic documentation. And if you're a user who just wants to experience fast and cheap DeFi, you can bridge over your ETH or other tokens and start playing around with any of the thousands of applications that are available on Polygon. Unstoppable Domains is the #1 provider of NFT domains. With domains ending in .crypto, .x, or .nft, Unstoppable Domains lets you replace your long, complex wallet address with a human-readable address. Using Unstoppable, you can verify the ownership over your NFTs, log into Web3 apps, and join tens of thousands of people using them as their Twitter usernames. With Unstoppable Domains, you can have all of your crypto addresses registered to one single domain. So it doesn't matter where crypto payments are coming from or where they're going. By registering all of your crypto addresses to your Unstoppable domain, all of that is taken care of in the back end. Better yet, with Unstoppable Domains, you don't have to worry about gas costs or renewal fees because you own it. Buy your domain and you can show it off as your new Twitter username. So you can get your name for as low as $5 at unstoppabledomains.com.
Okay, starting with the Sandbox. So I'm sure everyone knows what the Sandbox is. One of the decentralized metaverses, essentially, that is very prominent. Decentraland, the Sandbox, Crypto Voxels, those are your big three. I interviewed Marcus, who the recurring joke on this show is I don't know how to pronounce his last name, so I never say it, who's like the CMO of the Sandbox. So if you're looking to learn more about the Sandbox, what it is, go check out that interview, that episode with him. The Sandbox has announced that there will be another land sale on January 13th. So by the time this is airing, it'll be Thursday of the upcoming week. This is a big deal because Sandbox land is hot, hot, hot. There is a finite amount of Sandbox land that will ever be sold. So it is a scarce resource. And 70%, I believe it is, of Sandbox land has already been claimed and sold. So there's not that much new land to be released in the first place. Details about this land sale are essentially they're selling land around Mega City, which is, it's like a series of estates by like Hong Kong investors, specifically sort of tapping into the Asian market is my understanding of it. Wanted to highlight one of the estates that is going to be a part of this mega city, and you can buy land around Mega City. Adrian Chang, who is a Hong Kong-based entrepreneur and well-established strategic investor, is bringing his vision of the future to the Sandbox. That was as part of this essentially press release that the Sandbox put out. His XL estate, which means it's 24 by 24 lands, will be the innovation hub of Mega City. One of its main landmarks will be the GBA Pavilion, a vibrant place of creativity and tech wonders, showcasing the successes and achievements of the greater Bay Area startups. Around this pulsating center, GBA companies associated with Adrian Chang, C-Venture, and Eureka Nova will be featured and provide entertainment, exclusive NFTs, and immersive experiences, making it the place to be for innovators and dreamers of the future. And I have to say, I know this is literally a press release, this is a marketing plug, and I don't know. I know the NFT industry in general can be a little sensitive to, rightfully so, to VCs and companies and moneyed interests coming in and making this space corporate when what it is right now is so grassroots. So I don't know, some people may be having a reaction to that that's like, oh, that sounds so like corporate and money and VCs and blah, blah, blah. My reaction was like, oh my gosh, this sounds lovely. Like I had to remind myself that we're talking about a virtual space, but it really does reinforce, I guess, to me that eventually we're all just going to be living in the metaverse, hanging out at these pulsating centers of innovation and imagination. And, you know, it's so Ready Player One in terms of, oh, we're going to have this beautiful pavilion and we're all going to hang out there as our avatars with our VR goggles, and it's going to feel like real life to some extent. So anyhow, that's a little taste of what this mega city will be. You can buy land around it starting January 13th. It is expensive. The basic lands cost 1,011 sand tokens. Sand tokens, as of this morning at least, were around $5. So you're looking at about $5,000 per land, and that's before you hit gas fees. So if I would love to buy land in the Sandbox, again, as always with this show, this is not financial advice. Do your own research. I think it's probably a very smart play, and I would probably do it for the $5,000. I'd probably buy the sand tokens, do the whole thing. But I think the gas fees are going to be killer on this. It launches at 8 a.m. my time, the sale for them, which is I'm in Eastern Standard Time, and the land for the Sandbox usually sells out in a matter of seconds, and I'm sure the gas wars are going to be crazy. So while it may be the equivalent of like $5,000 in fiat, it's going to be much, much more when the gas fees are all said and done. So anyhow, if any of you participate, buy it, get one, please let me know. Would love to know what the experience of buying land on the Sandbox is like. Maybe I'll attend the sale and I don't know. I don't want to put that much money into sand if I'm not going to be able to get land. So that's my hesitation. Anyhow, please tell me if you take part in this land sale offering in the Sandbox. Very cool. And the Sandbox is a project we will continue to track for sure. Okay, next order of business, I want to talk about the apes, because lots has happened with the apes as always. And some of this is older news, but again, I haven't been on the mic here for a little while, so I wanted to make sure we touched on it. One thing, M&M bought a Bored Ape. So this made the news, of course, because M&M is now into NFTs and specifically into Bored Apes. But what was funny is I'm sort of naive, I think, and I guess naive, which is I always assume when somebody buys into a project, it's because they love the project. But I realized, and really it was CyberKongz, my interview with Inverted, who's the CMO of CyberKongz, that helped this click for me. Like, a ton of these projects pay for celebrities to buy into their project, which I guess should have been obvious because, of course, that's an obvious marketing scheme. But I hadn't really thought about it. And I think without naming any names, Inverted sort of implied that Bored Apes is one such project. He described sort of a Chevy marketing strategy where certain projects are very loud and very out there and very in your face, which certainly applies to Bored Apes. No shade on Bored Apes. And so I read this M&M news, and then I was thinking back on it, and I was like, it's totally possible that Bored Apes actually just paid M&M to buy an ape and to make it seem like he was, a Bored Ape fan. Maybe the Jimmy Fallon deal was that way. Who really knows? The question is, do I have a problem with projects paying influencers to buy into their project? And the answer is, I guess, no, honestly. As long as you have fundamentals to back up the project, as long as you're not sort of using that as a way to dupe your investors or dupe your community into thinking that your project is something that it isn't. But it does seem like Bored Apes is becoming a massive brand that will be able to back up its valuation. I don't know, we'll see. So, but it was sort of an aha moment for me, which is, did M&M really buy into this project, or is he being incentivized to buy into this project? And I think on this same front of, different strategies around how you handle your project from a marketing perspective, Apes actually flipped punks for the first time last month, back in December, as in the floor price of an ape rose above the floor price of punks. I think it actually flipped them a couple times over the month of December. And I think that actually speaks to the fact that the ape community does appear so much more active than the CryptoPunk community. And Yuga Labs seems just much more engaged with their community than Larva Labs does. Larva Labs seems to have a very quiet approach of just sort of existing and being Larva Labs and sort of resting on its laurels, you could say, I guess, in is maybe a negative way to put it. You could argue their projects are what they are, and they're so historical that it's valid that they just let them be what it is. But I do think it speaks to Yuga Labs' sort of hustle, and if they are paying influencers to be a part of their project, it seems to be paying off, at least in the short term here, in terms of prices, if that's what you're focused on. I also wanted to highlight an interesting trade. Jim McNeilis, who I've talked about on this show, co-founder of NFT 42, has been in this space for a long time, founder of the Avastars project, he made a trade with I Can Fly 3333, that's their Twitter handle, where Jim gave I Can Fly 8 apes and 5 mutants in exchange for 1 golden ape. So the golden apes are super valuable. So that was the trade that got made. And what was the reason I wanted to highlight it, and the reason I thought it was interesting, was I actually really I respected I Can Fly's move on that, because what it turned out he did, I think it's a he, I'm sorry, I'm assuming the gender there, but what he did was to sell off a couple of the apes that he got from Jim McNeilis. And I was like, oh, damn, I envy that, because I've had a couple of moments, specifically, I own a couple of VeeFriends that I had minted for like $2,000, and then, they shot up to like $70,000 a piece at one point. And I remember talking to my dad about it and showing him these VeeFriends, which are like, it's like a shrimp drawing that's, love you, Gary, no offense, but like pretty ugly. And he was like, oh my God, like, is there any way for you to at least take some profits off the table with that? Like, can you at least, does it have to be all or nothing? Like, I understand you don't want to sell these things outright, but like, God, this is like worth $70,000 right now. Can't you take a little bit of profit? And of course I couldn't, unless I wanted to try and fractionalize it or something. So I think it was very clever on the part of I Can Fly to make this trade and be able to take some profits off the table for himself. Now, of course, Jimmy is doing very well, so he doesn't need to take those profits. So for him, having the golden ape probably works out well. But it is something that I lament about this space, and I'm sure some of you out there who are deep in the NFT market do too, which is it does kind of hurt that it's such a zero-sum game, and that when you own an NFT, you have to either ride the wave all the way out or sell it. And so congratulations, I Can Fly. Good for you. Good for Jimmy. Congrats on a cool trade. This actually segues well, because the next topic I want to talk about actually sort of inadvertently connects to Jim McNeilis. I want to talk about Flipmaps. And to give some context here, I spoke about a project called Flipmaps in an earlier podcast episode. I'll refresh y'all's memory if you didn't listen to that episode or you don't remember what the Flipmaps project was about. I also spoke on an earlier episode of this podcast about the CryptoPunks fight, debate. I'll give a quick refresher on that as well. That's where this connects up to Jim McNeilis and Jimmy, because he's very outspoken about being very anti-CryptoPunks. But the reason I bring this up is Flipmaps is basically Flipmaps meets the CryptoPunk debate. There's a lot more nuance here, which we'll dive into, but this ties in a lot of themes that are really relevant to the blockchain NFT space. So I wanted to dive into it. So Flipmaps, for the quick overview for anybody who didn't listen to the episode or doesn't remember, is a project that was launched by Dom Hoffman. Dom was the founder of Vine Videos. He launched the Loot project. He was very early into Nouns DAO. So talented entrepreneur, very well known, very well respected in the blockchain space in general, has been a part of a lot of cool projects that have made a lot of noise. And basically he brought like 17 or 18 artists together to design this like pixel art. And I think there was a restriction that the artist could only use like 4 colors or 4 specific colors in designing the artwork. And the whole project is on chain, all of the metadata, etc. So, if Flipmaps, the website or whatever, like exploded, you would still have these NFTs. They're all on chain. And the really revolutionary thing, arguably, or the really interesting thing that Flipmaps ultimately did was all of the artists, and then ultimately all of the community holders that held sort of offspring of the original pieces, voted to put Flipmaps into the Creative Commons. They basically forwent any copyright over the project. So they said, we have no right to enforce any copyrights on Flipmaps. The community, the world can do whatever they want with this project. It's not ours, it's ours, right? It's ours, the general collective sense, not ours, the artist's collective sense. So that felt to a lot of people as very blockchain and Web3 native. And what it is, it's an experiment in a community, a truly community-run project. And it's an experiment in, can a collective group of, can the world make a project more valuable than it would be if it were sort of centrally controlled? And of course, there are risks to this because any fringe political group, like anybody can take this project and do what they want with it. So that's the risk you're incurring. But it's a really, I think, worthwhile experiment because I think it's going to be so interesting how this plays out, how Blipmaps and other projects who have opted to do this as well play out over the long term. Then the other bit of context quickly with the CryptoPunks, CryptoFunks debate. CryptoFunks is a project that launched well after CryptoPunks, and they basically took the CryptoPunks look and they just flipped it so that the faces are facing the opposite way as they face in the CryptoPunks project. Anyways, it's a complete copy of CryptoPunks, and so there's a lot of debate. Some people say this is a completely illegitimate project because it's not original at all. It's not even like a parody or interesting take on CryptoPunks, really. And the reason this became quite a big story is because CryptoPunks actually went after CryptoFunks and got them delisted from OpenSea, and that made some people very angry. And anyway, so that's an example of an NFT project owner, in this case Larva Labs, actually making it very clear, no, we do have copyright over our project. We do have a certain amount of ownership over this project. And if you infringe upon that, we will go after you. Blipmaps has said, nope, we don't care, do whatever you want. And they're giving that explicit right. So Flipmaps is a derivative project off of Blipmaps, started from within the Blipmaps community. As it turns out, the way that Blipmaps works, there are some number of combinations of like patterns plus colors that never actually got minted or created. And so Flipmaps is like filling in those uncreated combinations of colors and patterns, essentially to create like a complete set, to complete the Blipmaps set, I think is sort of what they're arguing. And they're saying, hey, we're also totally in the Creative Commons. We're also all on chain like Blipmaps. And there's been a lot of support for the team that's doing this from within the Blipmap community. So the founders come from the Blipmap world, and they're like, hey, we're also going to do our own things. We're going to have our own, future that we are going to chart that'll be somewhat separate from Blipmaps, but we also hope that will sort of start to be seen as part of the Blipmaps family. Blipmaps cost like 5+ ETH at this point to buy into. So there's sort of a feeling like this is, an accessible way to suddenly join Blipmaps, though they are a separate project. You don't technically get to be a part of Blipmaps in terms of being in their specific Discord channels, etc., by buying into this project. I bought one Flipmap. They're like 0.02 ETH or 0.27 ETH or something. They're not super expensive. Even still, I was like very hesitant to buy in a bunch because while I don't have a problem with derivative projects, they don't generally call to me. Even projects like Mutant Apes, right? I was on the cusp, I was on the precipice of buying a Mutant Ape for 4 ETH back when they first launched. And ultimately didn't, bought 2 creatures instead because that was around the same price. Of course, Mutant Apes are like 14 ETH now, and I want to vomit every time I look at it because I probably made a mistake there. No, I actually love creatures. I think I didn't make a mistake. I love creatures. But obviously, in the short term here, I definitely left money on the table by not buying a mutant. But I couldn't buy the mutant because I felt, I don't know, even though it was still a Yuga Labs project, it felt like, okay, it's not the original, and I don't know if it's like a weird inner snob in me or a weird inner elitist, but I just couldn't do it. But by buying the Flipmap, I'm trying to correct course on that aversion I've tended to have, because some of these derivative projects have actually do very well. It does feel a little bit to me like the Marvel franchise world in the movie industry, right? The fact that the highest grossing movies just seem to continuously be like remakes even. I mean, Spider-Man has grossed how many billions of dollars? It was like the highest grossing movie for like weeks on end in theaters. And literally there have been like 8 Spider-Man movies that have come out in my lifetime. So people do like the classics, and, Mutant Apes proves that. Again, let's make the clear distinction. Mutant Apes was actually a project that came from Yuga Labs, unlike something like this Flipmaps project that comes from community members of the Blipmaps team. Like Flipmaps was not created by Dom Hoffman and his crew, but it does feel like, as far as derivative projects go, it's as close to the founding team as you can get without being the founding team, given that this was a community member-led project that had support of the Blipmaps community really from day one, seemingly. So anyhow, this is my experiment in actually buying into a derivative project, albeit at a very, very minuscule level. And it's just something to keep tabs on, I think, as we figure out as a space when decentralized projects work well, when centralized projects work well, when derivative projects work. And I wanted to have a little skin in the game to force me to track this on a deeper level, I suppose. So make of that what you will. Buy into it if you, like me, want to track it more closely, but certainly don't take this as financial advice. My instinct, generally speaking, when confronted with the question, should I buy into this project, is like always no, which is so funny given what I do at this point for a living, which is work for a blockchain startup that deals heavily in NFTs and host a podcast about NFTs. But I am wired to really, really hate losing money. And not that other people aren't wired to hate losing money. Obviously, none of us like that. But clearly there are people in this space who thrive off of the risk. People who love gambling. I hate gambling. I go to casinos and I'm like, no, I would just rather keep my money than risk losing my money. I'm really averse to it. And so there's only been a couple of times in my life where I felt really strongly about a project. VFriends was actually one of them. And that's done very, very well for me. And so for the most part, I can kind of talk both sides of a project, right? I can talk the pros and I can talk the cons. And so I talk myself out of buying it because if there's even the slightest chance that it's going to lose money, I don't want to buy into it, which of course is all projects because no projects will ever guarantee you that you're going to make money. But I am actually trying to overcome that urge and be a little bit more experimental in my purchases because I want to learn this space, and it is helpful to actually be bought into projects if you want to learn about this space. So buying a Flipmap for me was, okay, let me keep tabs on what's happening here. And as I said at the top of this show, I really want to explore this question of intellectual property more deeply. And Blipmaps is at the heart of that debate because Blipmaps has given up ownership over their own intellectual property. And they're saying more value is going to be created by having this intellectual property be the property of the world rather than the property of ours. And I'm fascinated to see how that plays out in the long run. I worry about the freeloader problem, right? You have all these, nobody has, singular incentive to make this project amazing. On the flip side, the argument is, the X number of thousands of Blipmap holders now all have an incentive to make this project amazing. And so the odds that one of them emerges to create something truly fantastical with Blipmaps is high. So, I can argue both sides of it, and I think it'll be so interesting to see how it plays out.
Axie Infinity is a game universe filled with cute, fascinating little creatures called AXIEs that players can collect as pets. Players aim to battle, breed, collect, raise, and build kingdoms for their AXIEs. There are and will be many varied gaming experiences for AXIEs, many of them having players compete with each other using complex strategies and tactics to attain top rankings or be rewarded with coveted resources. Others will have them complete quests, defeat bosses, and unlock in-depth storylines. There are countless unique AXIEs that players can collect with varying body parts and experiences. The AXIE universe is a player-owned economy where the players can truly own, buy, sell, and trade the resources they earn in the game through skilled gameplay and contributions to the ecosystem. It's a digital nation where people come together globally with their AXIEs to play, earn, and live. Join the AXIE revolution at welcome.skymavis.com. Everyone is talking about the metaverse these days, and we're all still trying to figure out what it actually is, because everyone is looking for how to get exposure to it. That is why a metaverse index fund is so important, because in such a young market, an index can give you broad exposure to all the various players who are building out all these digital worlds that will ultimately become the metaverse. And that's why you should check out the Metaverse Index from the Index Co-op. The Metaverse Index gives you simple, easy, and safe one-click exposure to the emerging open metaverse trend. The MVI Index contains some of the biggest metaverse projects out there, including Axie Infinity, Decentraland, Illuvium, and more. So join thousands of holders who have already trusted nearly $50 million to the MVI Index. And if you buy $500 of MVI on the Dharma app, you can receive $50 worth of ETH on the Polygon network. There's a link in the show notes for you to click so you can get started on your journey into the metaverse.
Last project I want to talk about, and I actually hesitated. I debated whether or not to include this because I don't think I'm quite as knowledgeable on it as I would fully like to be, but I think it's worth putting on folks' radars. So if there are any of you out there that want to dig deeper yourself, you know about it and can do so. I want to talk about Chainfaces Arena. So for those who don't know, Chainfaces was a project that was launched last January by Nate Alex, also an OG in the space. He actually co-founded NFT 42 with Jim McNeilis, who we've mentioned in this show, and really talented, smart person who also has a lot of standing in the NFT community in general. So basically he announced with like 1 day's warning that he was launching a secret project and hopped on a Twitter Spaces to talk about it and opened up a whitelist pretty much immediately and immediately started minting this project. And the project was Chainfaces Arena. So he had launched a project called Chainfaces. This is now Chainfaces Arena. And it's a fully on-chain game, though it's really like gambling, where you can put your chain faces into an arena, and every 15 minutes a round of this, again, game ends, and a certain percent of the chain faces that are in the arena die. And then a certain percent live. And those that live accrue something called scars. And those scars make your chain face more valuable and rarer and are a signal of your chain face lasting in the arena. And so that's one reason to put your chain face into an arena, is to accrue these scars. The other reason is that if you take your chain face out of the arena, you become entitled to as you remove your chain face, you're entitled to some percentage of this overall treasury that I think is like 600 or 700 ETH. So you can actually get ETH by playing this game, putting your chain face in the arena, lasting in the arena, and then coming out of the arena. And of course, the longer you stay in, I think the bigger the part of the pie you get, etc. So I think this is interesting because it sort of reminded me of Wolf Game. It's a much more simplified version, of course, but it's this world of playing with on-chain, gamified, really gambling mechanics that I do think are kind of fun, that aren't possible without blockchain or are an interesting use case of blockchain. The reason I hesitated to talk about this project is because I know Nate Alex, and I know because I've some mutual friends with him, that he's very interested in technologically innovating in this space. So I imagine there's some really technically innovative components he's worked into this arena game, and I can't really speak to what those are. So again, I'm raising this to say, put this on your radar. It's an interesting project. It's by an interesting player in the space, and it's probably worth looking more into if you're interested in the ways that people are innovating technologically speaking in blockchain in general and in the NFT world. There was a little bit of community, I think, backlash. It seems like folks sort of disappointed in the project, feeling like it wasn't interactive enough. It really is a passive situation. You're just putting this your chain face into this thing called the arena, and then, taking a gamble, hoping that you survive and eventually can win some money on it. So I think folks were a little bit disappointed on that. Nate hosted a Twitter space, I think it was yesterday, so that would be this past Thursday, and he put some tweets out before the Twitter space, really saying like, hey, if you feel disappointed, please raise your concerns. I want to have an open dialogue. I really want to be transparent. This community means so much to me. Like, really awesome, saying all the right things. Plenty of people, I think, also loved this game and loved the Chainfaces Arena, so this isn't everyone. But I did not get to listen to the Twitter space because I have a job, and I actually don't know what time the Twitter space was, but I missed it, and it wasn't recorded. And this ties into a rant that I have given before about why Twitter spaces is so freaking annoying to me as like the primary way that the NFT world communicates to each other, because unless you record it, it's like this miserable thing that like only people who are available at like 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, which not all of us are, get all the alpha. But anyhow, he went on a Twitter Spaces to kind of talk about the project, standard stuff, like they have a lot more in store. So anyhow, interesting, worth putting on your radar. Check it out if you're interested in learning more. I will dive deeper into this. I just unfortunately didn't have time this week to fully dive in. But I also like the secret project thing. Like, that's kind of fun. Again, it's sort of an exclusive part of this world, and it's why it's hard for newcomers to get involved in early projects or cool projects because they don't necessarily know who to follow. But it was kind of fun how all of that played out. Okay, last on this week's episode, I want to talk. It's something a little different for me because I'm not really the girl who talks about Bitcoin. I'm talking about NFTs. I'm talking about the metaverse. I leave things like Bitcoin and anything DeFi, token, currency to the Bankless boys, to Ryan and David. But I did happen to tune in this week to an interview with a guy named Peter Schiff, and it was on the School of Greatness. It was a podcast called The School of Greatness. He interviewed Peter Schiff, who is like a big Bitcoin fudder. Like this dude, he's an economist. He hates Bitcoin. And I was like, oh, I should listen into this. And it was positioned like, oh, he hates cryptocurrency. So I was like, oh, I should listen. It really felt more like he just hates Bitcoin because the arguments he was making, many of them don't hold up once you start trying to apply them to Ether or other currencies and other chains. So I was like, oh, this guy doesn't feel like he actually has a really in-depth knowledge of what he speaks. But anyhow, I wanted to listen to it. I appreciate getting the contrarian perspectives. But what I found interesting is, so his central attack on Bitcoin is like, it's literally nothing. It's the same old thing you hear, right? Like it's doesn't have any utility. It doesn't have any purpose. It's not even truly a store of value because it doesn't have utility. Like at least gold, you can make jewelry out of it. And so, which also has always been a weird argument to me. Like, okay, you can make jewelry out of gold, but like, why does jewelry have value, right? All of this stuff has value because humans have decided to assign value to it. We've decided that jewelry is a way to socially signal. Like it doesn't actually feel different than being able to socially signal that you own Bitcoin to some extent. But anyhow, that's his whole thing. Oh, it has value and you can make jewelry out of it and therefore it's more legitimate than Bitcoin is. And then he goes on to acknowledge, because the counter to it is like, the dollar means nothing anymore, right? The dollar's not backed by anything. And he acknowledges that. He's like, and of course the dollar at this point isn't backed by anything. It used to be, but now it's not, blah, blah, blah. But the dollar matters and the dollar is legitimate because you have to pay your taxes in US dollars and your landlord accepts US dollars for your apartment, et cetera, et cetera. And so then it's like, okay, well, if the government decided to start accepting Bitcoin as legal tender, and if your landlord therefore had to accept Bitcoin as for your rent, like what's happening in El Salvador, does Bitcoin suddenly magically become legitimate then? Because I do think there's a world where increasingly vendors and other people start taking cryptocurrency as a method of payment. He doesn't address that, but it did make me want to share my justification for Bitcoin that I've used, because I'm actually not unsympathetic to his criticisms. And there's a reason that I got really excited about this space once I learned about DeFi and NFTs. I've known about Bitcoin since 2010, and that never really got me jazzed. Ethereum got me jazzed because I realized it was a platform atop of which so much else was being built. But when I've explained Bitcoin to other people, people who maybe don't get it and who share Peter Schiff's hesitations, for me, it's always been Bitcoin is my apocalypse play. Like in an apocalypse scenario, not as in the entire grid goes down, because that's obviously, that presents some challenges, but my apocalypse play as in the US government goes down, everything just starts collapsing, governments are collapsing left and right. We know that the Winklevosses and Balaji and I don't know, Mark Cuban and probably a bunch of people who are actually working behind the scenes whose names, therefore, I don't even know, are setting up some crypto-based society. And I'm grabbing my Ledger, my Ledger Nano with my Bitcoin on it, and I'm hightailing it to wherever they are. And honestly, I think that society is going to be better than the people setting up the society based on gold. And that is a very legitimate reason, in my opinion, to buy Bitcoin. If you're lucky enough to have some disposable income that you can put towards an apocalypse scenario fund, do it. I think that's a really valid reason. And I would be interested in hearing Peter Schiff's response to that. Now, this leads me to the philosophical, thought question. And I saw this on Reddit very shortly after I heard this Peter Schiff podcast. And it said, would you still buy crypto if you couldn't exchange it back to fiat? So if once you bought Bitcoin or ETH or any of the other currencies, you couldn't actually ever extract US dollars for it, would you still buy into it? And for me, the answer is yes. Not to the degree that I'm currently doing it, because I do teeter on the edge of too illiquid given, how much I like buying into these currencies and into NFTs and things. Though, as we've learned, I'm terrified to buy into NFTs because I hate losing money. But I would still buy this. I would still buy into ETH, and I would still buy into Bitcoin, because I do think that they are apocalypse plays. And I think that at this point in time, they're only going to grow in prominence in terms of the way they can be used every day with vendors, etc. And I like what I'm able to do on the Ethereum blockchain. I find it fun, and I need ETH as the fuel to make all of that happen. So of course, I mean, it's such a hypothetical. If you could never have converted Bitcoin or ETH back to dollars, it would have never gotten off the ground, because, the majority of people would never have put money into it, and these vendors wouldn't accept it if they couldn't ever convert it back to fiat. But the fact that my answer to that is yes, and the fact that I think many other people's answers to would they still buy it, even if they couldn't convert it back to fiat, is also yes, I think is the biggest counter to Peter Schiff's point here, which is this is not a group of people who is exclusively composed of folks who are speculating and trying to make more money. Plenty of that is going on, of course, but that is not 100% of what's going on. And that's why these projects have utility, right? That's why these projects have value in the way that gold has value, because it can be turned into jewelry. So anyhow, Peter Schiff, if you hear this, what say you to that? And with that, that's our show today. Thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate the heck out of you guys. And please, if you like this show, leave a rating, leave a review, subscribe, tell your friends. And I want to close with a huge thanks to the team over at Bankless, Matt, Luke, Dave, all of you who help edit this podcast. It's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes, and the team is amazing. And I'm so grateful to you guys for making me sound good every week. And for David and Ryan at the Bankless team for taking a chance on me and letting me be a part of your network. Thank you all so much. I will see you next week.
Hey, we hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, head over to Bankless HQ right now to develop your crypto investing skills and learn how to free yourself from banks and gain your financial independence. We recommend joining our daily newsletter, podcast, and community as a Bankless Premium subscriber to get the most out of your Bankless experience. You'll get access to our market analysis, our alpha leaks, and exclusive content, and even the Bankless token for airdrops, raffles, and unlocks. If you're interested in crypto, the Bankless community is where you want to be. Click the link in the description to become a Bankless Premium subscriber today. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for in-depth interviews with industry leaders, Ask Me Anythings, and weekly roll-ups where we summarize the week in crypto and other fantastic content. Thanks everyone for watching and being on the journey as we build out the Bankless Nation.